sort of drawn into this section of the movement?
Yeah, I can't really talk about what I did in the Sea Org.
Okay.
Because that's sort of like easily identifiable information.
Okay.
But yeah. Basically, the process is that if the person has some kind of specialized skill that they can use, then they're probably going to be used for that. So like a doctor, for instance, if they recruit a doctor, they're probably going to use him to help be a doctor.
All right. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. If you're just some kid, they're going to test and see how smart you are. And if you're wicked smart, then they're going to send you to probably some kind of management position. But it also has to do with your qualifications. So if you've ever done drugs and then did Scientology, but then did drugs again, then there's certain things in Scientology you won't be eligible for. But if you meet like all the criteria and you're super smart, then you're going to go into management. And management, is basically just different branches of the church that enforce the rules on all the rest of the Scientologists in the world.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah, and just all the associated management thereof.
So you spoke briefly about being involved in the Sea Org full time and not getting paid for the work that you were doing for.
That's right.
And so, without going into detail, sort of what does your average day or week look like in terms of how much time you dedicate to the church, how much time you get for sleep? There was things you mentioned about needing to buy your own shaving cream and stuff because you needed to stay like cleanly shaved all of the time. Right. But you're not getting paid to be working full time. So just kind of without giving away any personal details to sort of paint that picture for us a little bit.
Oh, this is a great story. Yeah. So when you join the Sea Org, you get introduced to this thing called the Estates Project Force, and this is called the EPF. And during the EPF, it's kind of like the boot camp of Scientology, and it's also where they, use it's like the hazing time of Scientology. This is where everybody treats you badly, and you ain't shit to nobody until you make rank and all that sort of.
Right.
And so it's hazing. They treat you really badly. You wake up at 5:30 or 6 a.m. and immediately make your bed and shower and change into your outfit. They give you a gray T-shirt and blue jeans is the only thing you're allowed to wear.
Okay, and so almost like a uniform.
Yeah, and it's got to be tucked in. And so anybody running around in those gray T-shirts, that's an EPF. And that's the people that you just fucking despise and spit on and treat terrible.
Okay.
And so when you're in the EPF, people really do treat you badly. And they look at you like you're a piece of crap and all this stuff. And that really hurt my feelings quite a bit because, I've been told about what an uptone. In Scientology, you're seeking to become uptone. Uptone means like you're high energy, you're bright, you're beautiful, and you're, being the most perfect version of yourself. Which is, energetic and confident and whatever that means to you. So Scientology, they're telling me what an uptone place that the Sea Org was and how on point everybody was and how, it's all this and all that. And then I get there and it's completely different. It was a bait and switch, and it wasn't like that at all. And actually they were just treating everybody like crap. And we were forced to wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. and you get up and you have to start running and make your bed and run into the shower and shower in like 10 seconds. And then, jump into your uniform and, by 10 minutes later, you're out front in the parking lot waiting to be addressed by the IC. And, it's several weeks long of going through this. So during that time, they never gave me the right introduction and told me all the procedures for like getting all registered and set up. Because even though you go through this long, like, procedural process of getting all registered and set up to make sure that you're eligible to join the Sea Org, you sign tons of paperwork and everything else. Until you get introduced to, where you get like the address, you get addressed how you function in the Sea Org, and
Okay.
they tell you where to go to register so that you can start getting on the payroll. And I thought that was all done automatically because I had just spent, a week doing paperwork just to get in the damn Sea Org.
Yeah.
I figured they would have figured out my payroll.
Yeah.
I'd had jobs before in the real world, so I knew like what it was like to get paid. This was not the normal. This was not the normal way. Let me tell you. So what you're supposed to do is go up to there and get registered, and you only start getting paid until after you're registered.
Right.
And so it's the first week, and I didn't even notice, and I asked them, they're like, "Hey, well, what about me getting paid this week?" They said, "Oh, we should be getting paid next week." I said, okay. And then so then next week came around on Friday. I was like, "Hey, I need to get paid because I need a shave, and I need to get shampoo and everything."
Yep.
Because I didn't have those things. And oh, well, are you registered? What are you talking about? Like, oh yeah, did you get registered? Oh, you need to go get registered. I'm like, well, where do I do that? I'm like, oh, I don't know. You're just gonna have to talk to your IC about it. Okay. So I go talk to my IC, like, hey, I need to get registered to get paid. And then, because I don't have any money and he said, oh, well, you can do that on your lunch.
Right. Okay.
And our lunch is like 20 minutes long, and we get to eat like after everybody else, like the leftovers.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So it's like really insulting to say that to me. And then
Yep.
I had also just come from like pretty high salary. So I was particularly irritated because this was completely unprofessional and disrespectful for no reason. So I was just like, well, fuck you. I'm going to go register because y'all didn't tell me about this shit.
Yeah.
So I just literally like walked away, and then he's like trying to grab my arm, and I like fucking turned around, and I was like, if you touch me again, I'm going to beat your ass. And I was not kidding around because, they didn't tell me about this stuff, and I was already starting to get tired of being dicked around.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I went up there to get registered, and then there was some other requirement that I had to go through in order to get registered to get paid. And so for the 4 weeks, I never received any payment for my first 4 weeks, and I was supposed to get $45.50 a week. But during that time, I'm still expected to maintain like perfect physical hygiene.
Yep.
I don't have the physical things that I need, like deodorant and a toothbrush, and because whenever I brought all my stuff over to be in the Sea Org, I just didn't have a lot of that stuff and left some of it like at the place I was staying. So I didn't have my own shampoo, I didn't have my own razors, and I had no money. And so it was just like really upsetting. So I had to steal people's shampoo. Like I was literally like, there's 10 guys who share that shower and all their shampoos are in there. I would literally just steal one every day.
Yeah. So you've spoken briefly about your, obviously during that time your leisure time's restricted, your clothing is sort of
no leisure time.
Yeah. And what you mentioned there that the food was usually the leftovers after everybody else had eaten. Is there a certain diet that people are encouraged to have when they are in Scientology?
No.
Okay.
If you're not in the Sea Org, then your nutrition is probably pretty good because most Scientologists are pretty knowledgeable about nutrition.
Okay.
And getting the right vitamins and minerals, and making sure you get enough exercise. I think in general, a lot of Scientologists are pretty good about that stuff. But when you're in the Sea Org, all of the food is made for you, and whatever they serve, you eat. And it is very, very, very basic cafeteria food, and it's like the cheapest possible cafeteria food that a cafeteria can buy. And they buy, at the time that I was there, 100% of their of all of their produce and all of their meats, and 100% of all the food that was fed to us Sea Org workers was from Cisco, which is a big, like, chain distribution food company. And
Yeah.
Cisco is great if you're, for certain things in a restaurant, for buying bulk rice and stuff like that. But, I really felt like we're supposed to be the guys that are saving the world. Like, could you at least make the nutrition like?
Yeah, I was thinking that, but they're so desperate to recruit people into the Sea Org, and then they're treating you all like crap.
Yeah, and then it's like prison food. Number one, it's basically like the people that are making that food have no training whatsoever at all in a restaurant. So they're like taking, 4 eggs, like 2 eggs in each hand, and then banging them on the griddle, and then cracking them with their hands, and then like the shell gets in the egg.
Oh no! No!
You're eating these cold, like stale off color, like leftover grade B eggs in the morning, and then you get like a crunch of a shell like that. That happened to me like 5 or 6 times.
Oh, that is nasty. You vividly painted that picture as well.
Yeah, it's basically the same level as a prison, the food for the Sea Org workers.
Oh. And what about sexuality? Is there any sort of doctrine or anything that restricts sexuality in terms of pre-marriage, post-marriage, those involved, those who identify as part of the LGBT community?
LGBT members in Scientology are basically discriminated against. Scientology has basically L. Ron Hubbard said that being gay is wrong, and that gay people are inherently out to get you. Like they're bad natured. They're trying to hurt you in some way. That's what L. Ron Hubbard said about gay people. In the Sea Org, sexuality is strictly forbidden unless you're married to the person, and you have to get married if you want to do anything other than kissing. And if you do anything other than kissing, then you'll be sent to the RPF, which is like the prison brigade section of the Sea Org. So, yeah, it's like a 2-year-long prison sentence within the Sea Org that you have to do, and that's what happens if you did anything other than kissing someone.
That is so if you're dating somebody,
yeah,
and you cop a feel of a breast here and there,
you're done.
For 2 years, you go,
That's right.
That is insane, isn't it?
Yeah, and then if it's like in an extreme case where they did like oral sex or something like that, they might get declared suppressive. Like they might get kicked out of. They might like get kicked out of the church, or declared suppressive, or they can do the prison detail.
Wow, that's
And the prisoner guys, the RPF's guys, are treated the worst out of anybody. So they're the ones, and they can't even talk to a normal Sea Org member directly.
That is. Oh.
And then what the RPF does, because there was quite a few people in the RPF when I was there. I wasn't in the RPF, but I saw them, and so all the shittiest jobs inside in the base at Flag Land Base, the RPFers are doing those jobs when no one else is there.
Right.
So like cleaning all the public bathrooms with perfection. Those guys are made to be on their hands and knees, scrubbing the floors with ammonia and all the special shit that L. Ron Hubbard said in the hours of like after 10 p.m. until 6 a.m.
Oh, or just for engaging in premarital sex or
just for touching the boob.
That's no.
I even know somebody that was RPF'd and all they did was like put their hand on the person's inner thigh.
Oh my goodness, that's some harsh.
It's harsh, yeah. What happens is these teenagers get married when they get desperate.
Yeah, well,
they can't masturbate whatsoever at all. They can't have sex or they can't. The only thing they can do is kiss, and they desperately want to get married. So these kids get join the Sierra when they're like 14 or 15, and they're married 16, 17, 18 years old.
That's
yeah, and so you go
crazy, isn't it?
You go from what's crazy is like people start dating each other, so to speak, and then they get married like 3 weeks later.
Yeah, and then I mean, what was it? One of my friends said to me once. She said that she couldn't get married if she hadn't had sexual intercourse with her partner because you need to do a test drive of the car before you purchase it outright.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people speak about compatibility physically between two people. And I've just finished a huge segment on the Jehovah's Witnesses that obviously have a lot of doctrine around a man and a woman in their marital bed. And it's like, imagine getting married to somebody and then just realizing that on your chaperone dates with one another, where you could maybe hold hands, you actually have nothing in common. You're not physically compatible. You actually are very uncomfortable with each other physically, or it's almost makes you cringe. I don't know. It's so strange to comprehend somebody being sent to almost a prison sentence for just expressing themselves physically.
It's pretty over the top.
And you're so indoctrinated at this point that you wouldn't just turn around and say, well, I'm not going to do that for 2 years. I'm just going to leave. Especially, if you've grown up with friends and family all involved in Scientology. So it's not as easy as just walking away, is it? At a certain...
Right. So some of them get a choice. Like you can either be declared and exiled from everyone and everything you've ever known, or you can do this prison detailed sentence for 2 or 3 years and get hypnotized and all that shit. And a lot of people choose the latter, unfortunately. They would do a lot better for themselves if they just said fuck it and left. But most of them don't because that's all they've ever known.
Once you'd finished this horrible regimented detail that you had to take part in, were you ever responsible for recruiting anyone into the church yourself?
No, I was never a recruiter.
Okay. So you don't have to sort of sit there and wonder what happened to the people that you brought into the fold.
Well, yeah, there's plenty of regrets, but that wasn't one of them for me.
Mm-hmm. And what about fundraising and donating? Is that an aspect of Scientology? Because we've spoken about, the literature that you pay for and sort of moving up in the levels. But what about like tithing and things like that? Are you expected to make donations?
So as a public Scientologist, you're constantly recruited and regged and sold Scientology. So the donations and the recruiting and the donate to the superpower building and donate to this and donate to CCHR, which is the church's anti-psychiatry unit, and donate to Narconon, which is the church's anti-drug unit, and donate to the Flag Land Base, and donate to the International Association of Scientologists, the IAS, is a big one that people donate to, and all of these things over time. Most of these wealthy Scientologists have donated a good chunk of change. Even the poor Scientologists that are barely making it, even those people, a lot of times you'll see that they've donated $20, $30, $40, $50,000, and the wealthier Scientologists, the sky's the limit. I know one Scientology family who's made a lot of money in technology, and in the year 2000 was the number one highest donation to Scientology in the world.
Wow.
And that guy had donated 20 or 30 million or something like that.
Yeah, that's a huge number. I mean,
now there's a guy or a family by the name of the Duggins, I believe, and he and his former wife, and it's Bob and Trish Duggan. He owns a company who owns the rights and distribution to the most profitable drug in the world, which is called Humira, which is if somebody's having I think certain neurological conditions and autoimmune disease.
Okay.
Humira is a miracle drug for people with autoimmune disease.
Okay.
It is the most profitable drug in the world, and it makes billions of dollars every month, I believe.
Wow.
And the rights to that drug are owned by a company called AbbVie, and Bob Duggan is the one of the founding partners, I believe, of AbbVie, and he's a billionaire, and he's donated an enormous amount of money to Scientology.
I think Scientology gains so much notoriety from the notable names that are involved in the church, because there's so much around, celebrities that are affiliated with the church. News articles about celebrities' children dying because they didn't get the necessary medical attention because of the beliefs of the church and things like that. So it shocked me when you said that they were the number one most donated to cause, because there's
the IAS.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Unification Church is huge throughout the world, and people donate thousands and thousands, and they have so many business ventures and
let me tell you something. The church, the religious group which has the most money from donations in the world is not the Church of Scientology. It's LDS.
Okay, yeah.
When I did research on the religion, which I've done quite extensively, the church that I found to have the most money of any of them was LDS, and they had like at the time like $50 billion or something like that. Whereas the Church of Scientology is much smaller than that. The Church of Scientology only has plus or minus probably between $2.8 and $3.5 billion now. And a lot of that money is from donation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting because even though the numbers might be smaller in Scientology, I think the donation sizes from people like the ones you've just mentioned are considerably larger.
Well, David Miscavige has done an incredible job at strategizing how to extract the most money from the remaining public Scientologists. So he's done an incredible job getting this money stacked up. I would say, he's very good at extracting the very last dimes from the remaining few public Scientologists. And when they created the IAS, or the International Association of Scientologists, back in the day, the original membership cost for that, I think, was $2,000. And then you were considered a lifetime member of the IAS. And then it turned into a donation thing. And for a period of about 20 years, they they pushed it really hard, getting as many donations and as much as they can to get people to push these statuses. And the status, gave these people more public notoriety, more self-aggrandizement, and more playing into their narcissistic tendencies, because these people could walk around with one of these little pins on their shirts, that signified to all the other existing Scientologists, that they donated 100,000, or if they donated $250,000, or
wow, okay.
In some cases, like some of the celebrities, like the lady that plays the voice of Bart Simpson, Nancy Cartwright, and people like John Travolta, and people like Trish and Bob Dugan, and the Zwans, her other ultra wealthy billionaire Scientologists, and James Packer, I believe.
I think Tom Cruise as well.
Yeah, well, I'm not just naming celebrities. I'm naming people that I know for certain have high donation dollar amounts. There's this other wealthy Scientologist family that made a lot of money in short trading in the 90s, and they're a famous wealthy Scientologist group called the Feshbacks. And all of these people have one thing in common, and that is that they're part of the Scientology game of being the biggest and the baddest, wealthiest Scientologists. And they play that game by having the most amount of money donated to Scientology. And and so they're in competition with each other, and they get to walk around with these little pins, that say that they, donated 5 million or 10
Oh
million
my goodness. As a competition. To me is like something that's so like otherworldly to me, that you can walk around with a pin badge of honor that you have donated such an obscene amount of money. As a little bit of friendly competition with your local Scientologist neighbor, that to me is just so, I can't even comprehend it.
And then those people that those people go to a big Scientology event, wearing that pin, Patron, Meritorious, or what they have, like a million different little names, Legion, Meritorious, or whatever. All these big, crazy sounding names. And, those people go to an event, and then somebody sees their little pin, and they're like, oh my God, Legion, Meritorious, 2 million.
That's crazy.
And they're like, oh, that's so wonderful. Oh, so these people get a lot of praise and worship, because they've donated them.
Yeah. I can just picture a man in a top hat with like a twirly moustache, and he's standing there twirling his moustache as everybody admires his different pin badges.
Oh, Legion, man.
Oh, Legion, yes.
That's just pennies.
So you mentioned before we hit the record button that Scientology has almost its own language, and you've gone through a few abbreviations during our conversation, but I didn't know if there was any basic pieces of language that you wanted to translate for the listeners.
Yeah, okay, I'll translate a couple here. Here's a good one. It's called WOG.
WOG?
WOG. Yeah.
Okay. WOG.
WOG.
Okay.
And WOG stands for Worthy Oriental Gentleman. And it was a slightly racist term used back in the, I think, early 1900s by English people in occupied China. So I think England may have occupied parts of China in the early part of the century, right? Like in the late 1800s to early 1900s.
Okay.
And WOG was one of the racial slurs that they used at that time towards just the average old Chinese guy. Right?
Okay.
That the British used. And So I think that's where Hubbard adopted that term, worthy Oriental gentleman. And in Scientology, what WOG means is somebody just in general who's not a Scientologist.
Okay.
Just a regular, average old person who is not religious, or maybe they were raised Catholic or blah, blah, blah. But in any sense, they're just a normal person. They're not a Scientologist whatsoever at all.
Interesting.
So this word is used sometimes where, like if somebody's sort of gone off the deep end and away from Scientology, and they've started like drinking at bars, or doing smoking pot, and they're just not being a Scientologist anymore, then Scientologists might say, "Oh, he blew," which means he like left the area.
Yeah.
He blew from Scientology and started living a WOG life. They might say.
Right. Okay. So yeah, if somebody came out and said that to you in a regular sentence and you had no idea what those things meant, then you would be lost, wouldn't you?
Completely.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Are there any others you wanted to mention?
Yeah, SP is something you hear a lot in Scientology. SP stands for suppressive person. PTS. PTS is the one you hear all the time. PTS means that the person is inclined to failure or inclined to accidents.
Okay.
That means that in some way or another they're connected to a bad person or an SP.
Right. Yep.
And that's causing them to have trouble in life. And until that SP connection is resolved, then they then the person will be PTS.
Right. Okay.
PTS stands for potential trouble source.
You could just speak in these abbreviations like constantly.
Oh yeah, psych instead of psychiatrist. The psychs got to them,
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah, because in Scientology, psychiatry and psychology are like evil. Like they're like the remnants of an alien race that enslaved mankind 8,000 or I don't know how many thousands or millions of years ago. But
it's weird as well because things around mental health, I think, are seen as quite progressive. So the fact that it's called Scientology, I think, almost paints the wrong picture for people, because then you find out that Scientologists actually have this viewpoint of psychology, psychologists, doctors, medical treatments of some type. And then you think that doesn't make sense because it's called Scientology. So you think it's going to be involved in the things that it actually does not believe in.
No, that is quite a good observation. L. Ron Hubbard actually had a sort of love-hate relationship with psychology and psychiatry. And I honestly believe the reason that he named psychiatry and psychology as the hated, the evil people, is because, number one, Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, is similar to psychology in the sense that a session in Dianetics would be considered like a competitive therapy to like sitting down with a psychologist for an hour. So, number one, it's a little bit of a financial competition for L. Ron Hubbard. And number two, I honestly believe that he was just jealous of psychology and psychiatry because he saw how much money it made. And so he wanted to name it as an enemy. And also, if you read that book, The 48 Laws of Power, it talks about the importance of naming an enemy to the group.
Yes.
So it served multiple purposes for L. Ron Hubbard. But any case, what's really, really bizarre, and what a lot of active current Scientologists, they do not know this, is that L. Ron Hubbard has this long embellished history within Scientology. Scientologists are given a huge laundry list of accomplishments that L. Ron Hubbard achieved in his life.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are false or lie or embellished. For instance, in Scientology, it is said that L. Ron Hubbard was this glorified war hero, and that he bombed a Japanese submarine off the coast of Washington, that he was wounded in some type of battle where he was blinded, his ship was attacked, he was blinded and shot up and all this stuff. And the way that he regained his vision was by doing Dianetics on himself. Right. You know, his own original version of the therapy himself and all this stuff. Well, it turns out that the real thing that the Army that the Navy acknowledged was that despite his subordinate officers telling him not to drop their artillery at the bottom of the ocean on the magnetic ridge that they knew about, he did it anyways.
Yeah.
And that he was never injured in any sort of battle. He didn't receive any war medals or any battle medals or anything like that. And that even stranger was that after the war, he complained to the Army and begged them in multiple letter correspondence, which you can see these copies of these letters of his handwriting, that he wanted them to give him psychiatric and psychological treatment after the war.
Right. Yep. That makes sense, because I was going to say that, you know, if it's somebody that could come up with, or somebody that believes in, I'm not even sure the best way to describe it or word it, but the whole premise of Scientology that you explained at the start, for somebody to have manifested this storyline of Thetans and all of the details that you went through, maybe he was constantly asked if he needed psychiatric evaluations, and that's another reason why he despised it so much. I don't know. There's so many different things that could have happened for him to have come up with all of the rhetoric that he did write around psychology. But it's interesting because I bet that there are so many professional psychologists now that would have given anything to have sat down with him and draw up their own kind of report or profile on the type of man that he was.
They definitely all would have come to the same conclusion.
What do you think that is?
That he was a severe narcissistic personality disorder with and self-aggrandizement, delusions of grandeur. A true narcissist, a true megalomaniac.
Definitely a cult of personality. I mean, you've probably, in the book you mentioned, the 48 Laws of Power, I imagine it must talk a lot about cult of personality if it's given you instructions on how to create a successful cult following.
Correct.
And what was your decision to finally leave? Can you give us any idea of why without going into specifics?
Yes. The reason why I left the Church of Scientology is because when I was a teenager, I naturally wanted to study all religions, not just Scientology. I was fascinated with other cultures, ideological beliefs, and other dogmas. I read the Tao in its entirety. I read the Quran. I read the Bible. All the both the old Bible and the new Bible. I read different books on like some of the subgroups of Christianity. I read the Torah. I read everything that I could get my hands on about religion. I read it, and I compared all of the major world religions to each other. And I understood the differences between what the Jews believe and what is Islam and the differences between Islam and Christianity. I studied Jainism in India, and I mean, everything. And the one thing that I saw in common with the vast majority of the religious beliefs that I researched was that they all, aside from Buddhists, they all had one thing in common, and that was that they all believed that their interpretation, that their version of God, and their version of their interpretation of God and spirituality was the most correct way of interpreting. And I realized that Scientology was no different. And I felt it would be extremely foolish of me to believe this way when there's 120,000 different religious beliefs and ideologies in the world, that to have such a naive worldview and such a narrow worldview was irrational. That just by statistic probability, it was enormously improbable that Scientology had interpreted these concepts the most accurate way.
Yeah.
And I saw that Scientology was probably the most narcissistic about their interpretation of quantum mechanics and quantum physics and spirituality and things of that nature.
Okay.
And so, or anything that could be explained in consciousness. So I think that Scientology was the most narcissistic of the religious beliefs that I observed, and probably Buddhism was the least.
Okay.
So I thought, this has to be a lie, because I can't see how it's a lie now, because it's everything that I know. Mm-hmm. But the probability of it being 100% accurate, the odds are very low.
Yeah.
Less than 0.1%. Mm-hmm. Actually, a millionth of a percent, something like that. So
yeah, I mean, especially when you think about, you spoke about some of the smaller denominations of Christianity, and there are just hundreds of them, and that's just Christianity alone.
Thousands.
So imagine, like, every other major religion has the same amount of branches, and then branches of those branches, and they are all claiming that not only are they Christian at the heart, or Jainist at the heart, or whichever major religion, they are also, say, Pentecostalism, for example. Right. There are hundreds of branches of Pentecostalism, and they believe, each of those branches believe that they are the ones that have interpreted the scripture correctly. So you are right and very rational in thinking, how can Scientology be the one out of these millions of groups that claim to be the one truth? Do you think that if you were asked to pick a religious affiliation now, that you would lean more towards something like Buddhism?
No, not whatsoever at all.
No? Do you class yourself as atheist now?
I would pass myself as, I fucking hate all religion. I despise religion and its falsehoods. I literally despise most world religion.
I think the difficult thing I have with most major religious movements is there is a point in history where you can pinpoint a group of people who have sat down and decided how to use that scripture for their own personal gain, whether it would be political power or power within society, or the church, for the church to bring power to itself at the expense of its followers, or to bring pressure and fear and scaremonger the people into the doors of the church. And I think there are so many points in each major religion where you can pinpoint where that has happened.
Yes.
Where potentially the scripture started out as pure in its intent, but has been exploited and used and interpreted by so many different people in such a way for personal gain.
Correct.
And I think that is, where you've spent 20 years of your life kind of being subjected to that sort of thing, I can see why you would sit there now and have that opinion of all religion?
I think that that's half of it. The manipulation and the control, that's half of it. Part of it is just my experience with religion was such an atrocity. But the other part of it is, really what's productive is scientific thought and scientific analysis and having healthy scientific skepticism. Religion puts itself in replacement of that often. And I think it's time for mankind to evolve again. The concept of spirituality, I can see. I presented a hypothesis to this for a group of atheists. My hypothesis is that spirituality came first. Spirituality came from it being comforting that when a person dies, that they're still there in some way later, and that once the apes developed their prefrontal cortex to be big enough for cognizant emotion, such as empathy, love, fear, etc. Once those emotions, once they were there to the point of being upset over loss, therein lied the door for spirituality. Because if we can imagine that that someone is still there, even though they're going to be gone forever, it's comforting that they're still there. And I think that it was born spirituality. And then from there evolved the various religious groups and so forth. From there evolved religion or the concept of God. And I despise religion because it takes away from science, but I see that it had a worthy place within human beings as a whole. I see that it was inevitable, that religion and spirituality and the concept of God were inevitable, but I think that they're quite unnecessary. And I think that eventually healthy scientific skepticism will replace all religion and all spirituality. I think that the road that we're on is definitely geared towards that. And that's the road that I'm on. That's what I push people to just think about rationally and just have a healthy scientific skepticism.
I think that's definitely a good way to think about it and to explain it and to offer to others as well as a thinking point or a talking point. Because a lot of the time, some people will leave one movement and find themselves in another and try to rationalize why the movement that they are in now is better for them than the one they were in previously. And a lot of that, I think, comes from the trauma that the first movement has inflicted on you that leaves you vulnerable to another movement sort of swooping in and scooping you up and almost inflicting the same experiences on you, unfortunately. But what do you think your life has been like since you have left? What's been the biggest change? Have you had to go through? Was there any readjustment period? And would you say now that you are overall more fulfilled and happier with life?
Yeah, so I struggle with PTSD quite a bit, and that shows itself in a lot of ways. I've struggled with some amount of addiction, and I say that leaving Scientology, if you're born into it, is probably like being tortured a little bit for a really, really, really long period of time. It really hurts your mind because it doesn't matter how much progress you make or what happens, you're always going to be gaslighted by Scientology. You're right, we're right and you're wrong. It doesn't matter. That's no accident. And so, it's hard for one to really, for me, it was a 10-year journey of just discovering who I really was, because I didn't have any concept or understanding of who I was, because, all I knew was my worldview in the way that it was in relation to Scientology and Scientologists' most basic inherent beliefs. And so once I realized how crazy it all was, like once I realized like how badly I'd been tricked and how incredibly different reality was from what I thought.
Yeah.
I was so shaken by that, because I was just like, how could I have been so fucking stupid to believe this? Like, how could I have actually believed in this way? And I think that going through that journey is one that, people really need help with, man, because they really don't know. Like these Scientologists who are in Scientology right now, they really, really believe in Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's very few Scientologists who don't really believe in it. Like most people who are really in Scientology, they really believe that their eternity is at risk. And so they really operate only and totally by these principles, by these policies. They only follow Scientology. So they really have no sense of self. And what's even crazier is they really think that they have a sense of self that goes beyond normal people, and they really don't. And they really think that what they're doing is going to help save the planet, and that spreading Scientology and doing Scientology is the only way we can salvage this planet from nuclear war and things of that nature. So when you're no longer a Scientologist and you go through that process of realizing like how false it was and how badly you've been tricked by Scientology, it really has a really bad impact on your self-esteem, because you were just able to be tricked for so long and just taken advantage of. And they took everything that I had, physically and mentally and spiritually. They literally took my sanity and my child. I feel like they stole my childhood that I would, if I could have just been born to a better family that wasn't Scientologist, it wouldn't have been so fucked up. And so I really have a really, really deep hatred of Scientology and of religion in general that I think probably goes beyond what anybody could really imagine. When I think of Scientology, I like my whole body tenses up, and I want to figure out, like in my mind's trying to figure out how to destroy it. My mind's trying to figure out how to not have these thoughts anymore. And, like if it was if Church of Scientology was a single building, somebody would have burned it down a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I imagine, the things you've spoken about there, you mentioned PTSD, but you've probably gone through a grieving stage as well, where you have grieved the childhood that you didn't have, that you might have had, where your circumstances different. And that has to be so difficult for somebody to kind of not only move away from the church itself, but to have all of these realizations. You have the first realization where Scientology is probably not the one true answer. But then if that's the case, then all of these things that I have done and all of these years that I have committed to the church and all of my childhood and everything has all comes to the same conclusion. But what you can't take away is the level of intelligence that you were able to gain through your upbringing, through your reading, through the encouragement of being well-read. And also, that is what saved you from Scientology, was your ability to sit down and read, was your willingness to sit down and read different religious texts that then, led you to be able to say, Scientology is probably not the one true answer.
Yeah, I think that just my raw natural ability to observe is probably the reason. And then there's the things that I've told you. But another reason that I separated from Scientology on like a more mental level was because understanding psychology actually helped me. And, Scientology always said that psychology was bad.
Yeah.
And I didn't think psychology was bad when I studied it, because I just studied it openly, I'm going to study this and see what it says and make my own conclusion.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
having that sort of sense of being able to think for myself, I think is really what separated me, because I was able to see that in psychology, they actually talk about things that is never mentioned in psychiatry. I mean, in Scientology, such as like attachment theory, like the way that parents interact with their young children. Yeah. And I had seen, for instance, that like my parents interacted with me with disorganized attachment, and I had seen the effects as clearly delineated in the DSM, the book of the psychology and psychiatry manual. It's called the DSM. If you look at attachment theory and see how these different ways that parents interact with their children affect them in the long term, you can see that this is a very accurate hypothesis, that this is a really in theoretical principle that attachment theory should probably be taught on a large scale. It would help. It would help society. And I had seen that, and no mention of it whatsoever in Scientology. And I thought, well, I mean, clearly this is a clearly observable thing. This is a workable like way of thinking about this. Clearly, there's something to psychology, and Scientology always said psychology was evil. So that sort of also was one of the reasons. It's actually studying psychology. Which I think that most Scientologists probably have a severe aversion to psychology, which is really sad to me, because I think ex-Scientologists probably need to go talk to a psychologist.
Therapy that most of the ex-members and survivors and victims I speak to have all said, those that have accessed therapy, it's been invaluable to them in their recovery. So it's interesting. But then again, things like attachment theory, the way that you've explained Scientology to me, I don't know why they would waste time explaining that or bringing things like that on board if it's as narcissistic as you have said it is, because attachment theory in principle is it doesn't serve yourself, it serves others. So, to build a better bond with your child, that doesn't help Scientology, but to read texts by Hubbard, that furthers Scientology's narrative. So I suppose that would make more sense in that way.
Yeah, and Scientology will never really change because L. Ron Hubbard's dead. All the ways that he said that you need to think about things, they're already written. So nobody can add to Scientology. They just do whatever L. Ron Hubbard said to do.
Yeah, step by step. And eventually those things are going to become so archaic. You can see how science moves forward, and science is, and and mathematics, and those things are provable. You can write those things on paper, and you can see how, 1 + 2 = 3. You can see those things. What you can't see are thetans and, trillions and trillions of years ago.
You can't see that.
It's interesting that science is so forsaken within Scientology, yet
that reminds me of something. There's another reason why I left the Church of Scientology is because, I had always studied science, but even when I still considered myself a Scientologist, Scientology says you have all these past lives, right?
Yeah.
And they have a group of people who have made like the higher ranks of Scientology, like OT8 and OT7.
Right.
And these people have done Scientology processing, going over many hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of these past lives that they've had. So my thoughts were, there's like 10,000 of these people, right? Like, or maybe 8,000 or 9,000 people that are on this like high level, like OT7 or OT8. So I thought, well, why don't we just get all the OT7 and all the OT8 and create like a special program where when they die, and when they come back in their next life as like a 5 years old or something, they make it to either flag or CST, which is a secret location in the church. Or my thoughts were that those people should come in their next life and have a very specific, non-arguable way of identifying themselves that was secret.
Yeah.
So that they can prove the existence of past lives.
Like just coming up to somebody and saying John Cusack, or some kind of keyword.
The follow-up, the concept for me when I was in the SO was that my concept was that we're going to get all the OT7s and all the OT8s. We're going to enroll them in this special program. And the program was going to be that they have a criteria where they return the CST, which is a secret compound in California. Not so secret anymore, but at the time, people didn't really know that these places existed. But Scientology has 5 or 6 different hidden locations where they have these gigantic titanium vaults built into the side of a mountain.
Okay.
And every single written word in Scientology is encrypted onto titanium alloy discs, and they're held in these vaults within these mountains.
Okay.
And this is secret at the time, even to the church, to public church members, but it's not secret anymore. But yeah, they have these crazy secret mountain vaults with these titanium and steel doors, which can withstand they can withstand a nuclear blast, so that if civilization gets completely obliterated in 10 or 20 or 50 million years, when there's another form of sentient life, Scientology can still be found and started again.
Right. Okay.
So my idea was to get all the OT7s and OT8s who, at the time, I thought, obviously I was a believer, thought that they could really recall these past lives. And I said, every single one of them is going to have a file in their pre-clear folders, because Scientology keeps these folders of all the information on somebody. In their folders, in their OT folders, there's going to be that folder, and the folder is going to have the very specific details of what the person is supposed to do and say that's unique to them, so that when they're 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 in their next life,
Yeah.
can make their way back here and go through that rhetoric.
Yeah. That's rational as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that was my idea, but they didn't like the idea.
Well, I mean, now that you are where you say you are, it makes sense that they wouldn't like the idea.
They don't want that, no.
Yeah.
They don't want that because nobody's ever going to be able to do it because it's not real. So that was one of the big things of why, that was another one of the reasons why I left, is because that concept was rejected. I presented it to some reasonably high-standing members within the church.
And they poo-pooed the idea.
Yeah, they don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well,
they don't. Yeah.
It sounds like the reasons you left is sort of like an amalgamation of things, a build-up of things, and then you kind of distanced yourself from the church, and you've said that you've had to do a lot of work since on repairing your psyche, learning who you are, and things like that.
That's true.
So I've gone through all of my points now. My question is, do you think there's anything that we've missed off that we should cover?
I think I'd say, but the primary thing that I wanted to say, and this is really more for people that may have just recently left Scientology, or maybe they're still in Scientology, or maybe they left but they still believe in it a little bit. I think the most important thing that I can tell somebody who's still in the church and still believes in this is that the church is lying to you. The way that the church is presented, past lives and body thetans, and all of the advanced level material in Scientology, including past life engrams and past life incidents. These are fake. They're not real. And body thetans are not real. When you're auditing yourself on OT7, and doing upper level auditing and supposedly getting rid of these things, it isn't working. You're just experiencing the placebo effect. That is provable. The church does not want to prove the existence of past lives. If they did, of course, Scientology would win the world's attention, but they can't because it's not real. RTC, if they had your best interests, they would prove the existence of past lives very easily by running an experiment such as the one that I just spoke of. But they reject real scientific criticism. Scientology is lying to you. Body thetans are not real. You're just experiencing something called the placebo effect. That's how the supposed gains that you've been achieving in your auditing occur. It is not based on reality, and you are imagining these past lives. It's not real, and it's provable, scientifically provable. It's also scientifically provable, or I'd say it's improbable that past lives exist whatsoever at all. And if RTC really had the best interest of Scientology in mind, and if Scientology were real, it would be very simple. All they would have to do is run one of the experiments such as the one that I presented to the church. And if you could prove the existence of past lives, just that by itself would make you the number one talked about thing that year, probably. I mean, if you could really prove on a scientific scale that there really, really was past lives, you would have the entire world's attention, and Scientology would get the tens of millions of people involved that it wants. But they can't and won't do that because it is not real. I promise to any Scientologist or listening that there is absolutely not true what you think about past lives. And thetans, and if you're on the upper OT levels, body thetans are not real either. And when you're auditing your ankle or your shoulder or your spine or whatever, auditing out those supposed body thetans, or that's not real either. And I never did the OT levels, and I have literally read every single confidential LRH material from OT1 till OT8. The other thing that anyone listening who's an active Scientologist should know is that there is no OT levels past OT8. L. Ron Hubbard did not finish or complete any OT levels past OT8. So the reason that they've been telling you that they're going to release OT9 and 10 and that they never have is because there aren't any materials. The Bridge to Total Freedom does not go up to OT15 as it suggests. It is complete as it is now. There's nothing left. And last but not least, in 1968, Hubbard himself sent out a survey to about 100,000 people in the UK and to Europe. And that was called Reform Code, and that program. And they sent a massive survey to 100,000 people in the UK and Central Europe, such as Germany, France, and Belgium. And they asked the public generally what they thought of Scientology. And in that 100,000 mailings, the main concern that the public had with Scientology was two policies, one being fair game and the other being disconnection. In Ron's journal, 1968, not to be confused with the famous or infamous OT3, RJ69 or RJ67, but in Ron's journal 68, L. Ron Hubbard, in his own voice, says disconnection and fair game are hereby canceled. And if you're a current Scientologist or somebody who's still on the fence about Scientology, my suggestion is for you to go on YouTube and search RJ68 disconnection canceled, and you will find a video. You will find multiple videos of a recording of Ron's journal, which you won't find in the church today, where you can hear in Hubbard's own clear voice him telling you that disconnection as a policy is canceled. And if you're in Scientology, you know for a fact, your whole life in Scientology, you've seen people getting declared, and you've seen the enforcement of disconnection through RTC, through ethics officers and MAAs, Master at Arms, at the advanced basis, and in this Europe. Disconnection as a policy is still enforced. That means that the Church of Scientology, the way that it's operating it right now, is a squirrel group of what L. Ron Hubbard originally created. Scientology is in contradiction to itself because it is not, in fact, following the policies laid out by Hubbard, as Hubbard canceled disconnection, and it is still enforced disconnection for as long as I was involved in it. And if you've been in Scientology long enough, I'm sure that at some point you felt the incredible repercussions of one of your friends or family members or associates. Maybe it was your son or your daughter or your mother or your grandparents, or maybe it was your sister, or maybe it was one of your friends, that when they discovered the falsehoods of Scientology and started speaking about it, you lost them. Or maybe you've almost been declared yourself for having thoughts about that Scientology might not be real. Well, guess what? That fear that holds you stuck in place in Scientology was eliminated in 1968 by Hubbard himself. So the current church management is not operating on your behalf. They're operating with malicious intent. And I strongly encourage you to do research outside of Scientology so that you can discover the truth for yourself.
That was so wonderfully said. I think what you've said there has given so much food for thought. I mean, just going back to what we mentioned briefly about branches of groups, that interpret scripture to suit their own personal visions or to benefit them personally. This is just one example of how that is happening now. The original founders' views have been skewed to suit the current management style of Scientology.
Correct.
And it is the group itself sounds like it's damaging, but then with that particular piece of scripture or that particular piece of doctrine that's left in, that is what's damaging. It's not being able to keep those family ties, those social ties, and it's the fear of leaving a movement like that keeps you stuck there when actually that shouldn't be happening anymore.
That's right. And it's the chains of spiritual salvation. Scientology is not the only religious movement that has that. It's just probably one of the more extreme versions. In Catholicism, the person, it's a similar way. It's the chains of eternal salvation, right? So as long as the person repents and finds God and Jesus, then he can be saved. Mm-hmm. And then the person's eternity is not at stake anymore. And Scientology operates itself in the same way, in that as long as the person does Scientology and goes up the bridge to total freedom, then as long as he's actively doing that, then his eternity is saved. Mm-hmm. And a lot of Scientologists are not willing to have that be put at risk just because their son decides that they don't want to do Scientology. They'd rather disown their mother, their brother, their sister, or their family. They'd rather get rid of their own family than to not do Scientology. And for that reason, Scientology is inherently sick. It's inherently disgusting, malicious, family destroying organization. Another point I'd like to say, if somebody's listening who is a Scientologist, I hope there's at least one, that don't be afraid of looking at the confidential OT level materials. It's not anywhere near as crazy as some of the shit that you read in The State of Man and so basic book. It's on the same level of science fiction kind of crazy interplanetary stories, and also tens of millions of people have read the entirety of OT3, and not a single one of them has been died from that. So in the Church of Scientology, it says that if you haven't read, or if you haven't worked up to the levels of doing the OT levels, OT 1, 2, and 3, and if you do it out of order and you learn about OT3 ahead of time, that you'll die. And I just wanted to let all the Scientologists know that's not true at all. There has literally been tens of millions of people that have read the OT3 scripture, which is written in L. Ron Hubbard's own handwriting, and it's not a big document. And tens of millions of people have read and listened to his lectures on OT3, fully confidential church materials, and zero of them have died. So don't be afraid. You're not going to die. Don't believe any of it. It's all bullshit. Body paintings aren't real, and it's going to be fine if you start researching Scientology with a healthy scientific criticism, and it's going to be fine if you learn about it for yourself and see the real, unbiased, factual information. And there's literally maybe 15 or 20,000 Scientologists actually left in the world, and there ain't no 10 or 12 or 20 million.
I think again that's well said. It's about once there's that seed of doubt, it's about taking back your own life and and, you
That's
know,
right.
writing your own narrative as you want it to be told, and not having your life dictated and told as somebody else thinks that you should be living. So
Absolutely.
you've done that. You've taken your power back. You're now writing your own narrative. You've, you know, worked through some of the issues that have come from leaving the church and readjusting into typical everyday life. And I think it's commendable that you're willing to speak about it, and that you're inspiring others to do the same, you know, to just not just to jump off the deep end and just leave straight away, but to, you know, take that seed of doubt and do a little bit of research and read some things and work some of these things out for yourself. If you're starting to feel yourself move away from the church, or if you're starting to feel yourself you know, doubt some of the policies or things that are in place, or, you know, or your future within the Church of Scientology, to just take those small independent steps into online research, which I'm sure is bountiful, as it was for the Jehovah's Witnesses that have left the church, were able to do a lot of research on all of the past doctrines and how those scriptures have changed. So,
and here's another thing too. Here's another. Just look at, you know, the church. Like, don't worry about the conditions. Don't worry about, you know, whether or not you're in doubt condition, or don't worry about anything within Scientology. Just think about this one thing. As a church who's claiming to save the world and create interplanetary salvation for these spiritual beings, does it make any sense whatsoever at all that included within that would be ripping apart families because somebody says, hey, I don't think I want to do this anymore, or like, hey, I don't think this is real? Does it make any sense for a supposedly benevolent organization, you know, a supposedly, you know, the most ethical group of people on the planet, does it make any sense for them to tell you that you shouldn't talk to your mother or your father or your brother or your sister or your own children?
yeah.
Does it make any sense to you whatsoever at all that a church, who's supposedly the most ethical group of people on the planet, would suggest that you no longer speak to your own children?
Yeah.
Or your grandparents or your parents? If you're listening to this and you know, you've ever even considered Scientology, don't.
Yeah.
Number one. And if you're in Scientology now, just think about that one thing. Mm-hmm. Would it ever make sense? Would you think the Pope would tell someone they can't speak to their own daughter
just because their faith is wavering? Yeah.
Just because they say that they don't think that Jesus is real or something? Like,
yeah,
come on, man, this isn't going to help save the world. You're destroying families.
Yeah.
And and also, if you've thought about disconnecting from your own children, you should feel fucking ashamed for yourself. Don't ever put your own blood before, you know, second to fucking cults.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't ever let somebody tell you that, you know, you can't speak to your own family.
Yeah.
Don't ever, if you have children and you're in the Church of Scientology, don't put your children, you know, behind Scientology. Scientology is not out to help you. I promise you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They want your money.
I think you've summed it up perfectly there, and I think that's the perfect piece of advice to end our interview on. I have gone through all my talking points, so if you think you've covered everything, then
no, I think we're good.
So we're gonna leave our listeners with the message that your children and your family should always come before anything else.
That's right.
And I think that's a very important message.
Practice loving your family unconditionally.
Yes, yeah. So I just wanted to say that you've come and told your story to me, which I am so grateful for. I think you're inspiring. I think your story, even though you weren't able to give us too many personal details, I think you've given the listeners enough to be able to take some of that and hopefully apply it to themselves.
I hope so.
Thank you so much, Fred.
I hope they just stay the hell away from it.
Yeah, well, I think you've definitely given enough information for people to steer away from Scientology if they were thinking about getting involved. But thank you so much for just coming here and giving me so much insight. So much of your experience has come through in this interview, and I think it's a great introduction to Scientology. I look forward to exploring it some more. So just thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with me today, Fred.
Absolutely. I look forward to hearing the podcast.